Ginny, give me 1 second. I'll get it started. Ginny, you can go ahead. We have a quorum present. Yep.
To my colleagues and staff. As most people know, I've been pretty severely ill for the past 6 weeks. Not quite, but I just thank you so much to everybody for all of your willingness to adapt and to everyone that's kind of helped me on the journey. If someone there wouldn't mind calling the role who exactly is here, I would appreciate it, because I think probably people can see better than I can.
Yeah, I can do it. Committee member, this is a meeting of the Council Finance Committee to consider a number of ordinances and to also
Is there anyone that can do that, or?
Oh, she's not hearing it.
Okay. To consider a number of ordinances and to also take a report from the budget director and the city treasurer on the city's financial position and federal COVID relief money, which would be the first order of business.
I can start. Committee members Jamel Robinson and Alfredo Ballerin are here. We're also joined by Mike O'Brien.
Yeah, unfortunately, I forgot to bring my laptop.
And we're also joined by council members Kelly Kimbrough and Jack Flynn. I'm not sure if there are any other council members here. I can also see we are joined by our treasurer, Darius Shanafar. And I can see that our corp counsel is here, Martha Mahoney. And oh, there's Nick Blaze and Anne Marie Salmon. And I also know that J.R. Pichardo is here because I saw him making us all be able to connect. So thank you very much, J.R. and everyone. What I'd like to do is start off with our ordinances so that we can kind of move quickly on those, and then we can move on to the discussion point of the federal aid funds. So first up, we'll go in order, is Ordinance 113221, an ordinance of the Common Council authorizing the sale to Aman Restorations, LLC of 948 Broadway. Is there someone here that can speak to this a bit?
Oh, thank you.
I think you guys need to talk into your mics, and then it works.
That better?
I think Martha is still unmuted.
Hi, I'm Jerry Allman from the line art, Allman Restoration. Now, I'm Jerry Allman from Allman Restoration. Do you want me to speak about the project, or am I going to be asked questions? Okay, am I waiting? Okay. Okay. All right, so the overview is that I purchased 952 Broadway back in March. And the plan was to have an addition onto that location for the main scope of the project, to include a lot of patio space. Initially, we thought we could go to the west, but then we were told by planning that we weren't able to do that because of floodway restrictions. So then we made an attempt to acquire 948 Broadway so we could put the addition on the east side of my property. Once we contacted Dan Hirschberg and got an accurate plot plan and boundary restrictions, we realized that actually that particular parcel is undevelopable. There's a substructure underneath the pump station that expands on that parcel, and there's the Patroon Creek culvert that cuts in from the south side, as well as floodway restrictions that go to the north side. We'll still be able to utilize that for an open area, landscape patio area, and in the Hirschberg work that was done, they realized that there is more room to expand to the west side than was originally thought. So really, as it pertains now, the only thing that's important is that we take the existing structure and rehab it, and then excavate the current property, 948 Broadway, to be part of our plan. It's going to be a bar restaurant, open probably even for lunch times, and the use of the outdoor patio space right now to make it financially feasible in the future is intricate to the project.
And what, I can't do this.
Is this thing on? Okay. Yeah. Hey, I'm the sponsor of this. I do support it. It's the structure down there is an old pump station that's been defunct for years. I think the previous owner at CrossFit tried to do something with it, but it was just unworkable for her financially. I'm glad to support Mr. Armand. I, have a, knowledge of his past business endeavors, and so I support this 100%, and I hope other council members will also.
Thank you very much for that. Are there any questions?
Do you want to do public comment?
Okay,
ordinance by
seeing none,
ordinance?
could I get a motion?
Do we want to-
Sorry, we're having some technical difficulties.
Jenny, do you want to do public comment? I don't know if anybody's here for public comment or not. Do you want to do it ordinance by ordinance? Shouldn't we at least offer public comment before we make a motion? I don't know if she can hear me. Is JR here?
Johnny, oh.
I don't think she can hear us.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, do you want us to do public
Okay,
comment?
so why don't we move forward with this? Can I get a motion on this
Do you want us to offer public comment first before?
resolution?
I don't think
And
she can hear us. Is JR here?
I'm right here.
if you guys,
Can you hear right now? Yeah, there's a couple comments.
okay. Go ahead for the couple comments.
Do we have anyone who wants to publicly comment on ordinance 113221 regarding the parcel at 948 Broadway? It does not appear that there is anyone wishing public comment.
Excellent. I also wanted to note that Councilmember Richard Conti has joined us. Seeing no comments and no questions, could I get a motion on this legislation?
Yes, I move that we move ordinance 11.32.21R out of committee with a positive recommendation.
And could I get a second?
Alfredo
seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
And maybe Alfredo, put your second hand up if Mike is there. Perfect. It's unanimous. Thank you very much. And thanks for coming to speak on it. We appreciate it. Next up, we have ordinance 125121R, an ordinance of the Common Council authorizing the sale to Brenda Robinson of 256 Livingston Avenue and 258 Livingston Avenue. And it might make sense to take up 165221 as well at the same time. Although I guess not, we can take that up separately. So if we can move forward with 125121. I was thinking that they were all right next to each other. Is there anyone there that is here to speak on it? I'm not sure if Councilmember Lev is here.
No, she's not present.
But I'll speak to it. So although I will be recusing myself from this particular ordinance and also ordinance 1652-21, 2052-21, Dr. Brenda Robinson, these properties are adjacent to the current property that she already owns. She's been the primary caretaker of these properties that abut her property. She's been keeping the grass mowed. She's also has been picking up debris, keeping individuals from loitering around the properties. She has been doing this for a while, and these properties have been sitting vacant for a while. So I think it's only befitting that since these properties are adjacent to her property, that she would be able to purchase this property as she has already been maintaining the properties in their current condition. So.
Thank you for that. It looks like we have an assessment number on this, and just a quick
I think we have a
question
public
for
comment.
I don't know. Was somebody asking a question there? It sounded a bit
We
like
have one.
Michael
We have
Brown's
Jenny.
voice.
We have
I
one
might have-
comment. That's all.
Are there any other questions on this? And I know we have a Corp Council person here as well that they usually go through the process.
Hi. I wanted to give some public comment on. I wanted to give some public comment on these two proposed sales. I understand that Councilmember Robinson has indicated that Dr. Robinson owns the adjacent property, but according to our tax maps, that's not accurate. When I saw these three sales proposed, I actually looked it up, and she's not listed as an adjacent property owner for any of these three parcels. I inquired with the clerk and then also with the assessor, and they confirmed that she's not an adjacent property owner. So I was actually a little confused on why the city would choose to sell three properties to somebody who's not adjacent. I do think that one of the parcels is owned by an LLC, and so perhaps she is a majority interest in that LLC, but based on our tax maps, she's not an adjacent property owner, which is concerning to me. I live next to a vacant lot by someone who's kind of like down the road and around the corner, and the grass often gets really high, and I have to kind of remind them to come and take care of their property. And so given and so I think it's important to me, even though I don't live in that neighborhood, that we do have property owners that are close and nearby and able to maintain. So I appreciate that Councilmember Robinson indicated that she has been doing that for years, but I'm still concerned that perhaps the committee is relying on inaccurate information when deciding whether or not to sell this property to a resident. My other concern is, does she have any plans for the property other than just to expand the amount of land she holds? Even if the city is not using it for some specific public purpose, the land could be better utilized other than just selling it to a private landowner, especially when we have 3 properties that are kind of adjacent in that part of town. I think as Councilmember Farrell was bringing up, Livingston and Lark, one of the properties on Livingston shares a land border with one of the properties on Lark, and so they're all kind of in that same location. So I just wanted to raise those concerns. If anything, I think the committee should defer taking action on this until Dr. Robinson's interest in the property is at least clarified and made accurate in our materials, so that we are above board in the transactions that are coming before the Common Council.
Thank you.
Are there any questions?
I'd like to make a comment, Madam Chair. Okay? You okay with that?
Kelly's going to make a comment.
So what I would just add is that Dr. Robinson she's not the immediate adjacent property, but she's maybe 1 property away. She certainly lives in the area, cares about it, and takes care of it. The properties there are the corners of Lark. 2 are on the north side of Lark Street, and 1 is on the south side of Livingston. They're pretty close in proximity there. As far as the interest, her interest in the property, I didn't know there was an LLC involved. I thought it was just a sale to Dr. Brenda Robinson. And also, I don't recall us, delving into and stating, well, what are they going to do with them, I mean, it's important that we know how the properties are going to be developed, so we don't just end up with them back on vacant and unkempt. But I don't know that. It'd be nice if she told us what she plans on doing with it, but I don't know that we made that requirement of other folks. So that's all I had to say.
My name is Martha Mahoney. I'm here from Corporation Counsel's office, and I can speak to the first concern. This ordinance was drafted before I joined the office, but I was briefed prior to attending this meeting that we were informed that Dr. Robinson is not the property owner, so the supporting memorandum should be amended to reflect that Dr. Robinson is not the property owner of the adjacent property. However, we are aware that she maintains the adjacent properties. Yep. Thank you.
Go ahead, Alfredo.
How far does she live on these properties? Is it on her block? She's in the neighborhood. It's not as if she lives, a mile away. She lives just a few lots away, what are being told, right? That's my understanding. Okay.
Are there any other questions? Go ahead, Alfredo.
I'd like to make a motion to move it forward. I think since she lives in the neighborhood and has been taking care of it, I feel comfortable with that. I know she's a good neighbor. If she was someone who lived downstate or then someone that people didn't know, I'd have a different sense of concern. But since she lives in the neighborhood, and I think we all know the good work that she's done for our city, especially over the last year and a half, I feel comfortable with her being the purchaser of these lots. So that's a motion to move forward with the that's a motion to move forward with a positive recommendation.
So Alfredo moved. Can I get a second? Which would have to be Mike.
I'll second.
All in favor with Councilmember Robinson recusing himself?
Aye.
Okay, thank you very much. Next up, we have ordinance 145221, an ordinance authorizing the sale to Burke Community Service Corporation of a portion of the city-owned Delaware's Paper Street and a portion of the city-owned Alexander Paper Street. I'm not sure if council members Frederick or Robbins, or no, I'm sorry, I was looking at you, Jamal, or Johnson are here. And, if Corp Council can speak to this. If not, it looks like Green Tech is trying to purchase the grounds that they are on, and part of that is there's paper streets within it that would make their land contiguous. In order for them to purchase it, they need to purchase the whole lot. Jack, it looks like you have your hand up.
No, there's a speaker for this. Jeannie, there's a speaker for this property.
Oh, great. Go ahead.
Hi. I'm Paul Eman. I'm the director.
You hold the mic up.
I'm Paul Eman. I'm the director of real property for the Roman Catholic Diocese. Burke Community Service is an arm of the diocese. So I'm having a lot of trouble hearing what you guys are saying. There's a lot of echo here for me. So if you want me to give you a little history on what this is, okay? So this property is located behind the Green Tech High School now, which was formerly Cardinal McCluskey, which built that building or moved into that building back in 1967. Students have played baseball and football on those ball fields where these paper streets cross since then. In fact, I graduated there in 1973, and I remember, being out there. In 1977, Cardinal McCluskey and Vincentian Institute merged, and those teams played on those ball fields as well. And this chain of high school incarnations at 99 Slingerland Street have kept a strong presence, an important presence in that neighborhood for over 50 years. So in 2019, I was relatively new to the job at that point, and I was contacted by DGS here in the city to come and clean up some debris and some overgrowth on a cul-de-sac on Beano Street. And I didn't know that I had a cul-de-sac on Beano Street, so when I looked into the matter, I found that there was indeed a cul-de-sac at the end of Beano Street that happened to be on our property, and then I couldn't find a deed or a easement or anything to corroborate this. So I had a little conversation with somebody at DGS, and then I called the planning office, and I talked with, that was back in 2019, I talked with Luis Roldan at the time, Subsequent to that, I've had numerous conversations with Chris Spencer, Zach Powell, and Brett Williams from the Corporation Counsel's office. And the upshot of it is that this property has been used, as I said, for over 50 years by Carla McCluskey, Bishop McGinn, and Vincentian Institute. And now we're hoping that Green Tech can enjoy the use of this property as well. We knew that this property was supposed to have been taken care of many years ago, before this contract with Green Tech came to fruition. It just never was. It was an oversight, and I don't want to blame anybody, an oversight on my predecessor's part, who had assurances in previous administrations that this would never be an issue. And I know that, you know, there are no rubber stamps any longer. There may have been back in the day, but I know that. So we've been in contact with the planning office to formulate a plan to give the city a 10-foot swath of land that crosses this property from, it will cross over the part of Alexander Street behind one of the ball fields that's there, which is across one of these paper streets. It would cut across the throat of the cul-de-sac on Beano Street and then drop down about 110 feet and come back out towards Swan Street on the other side, which would be the north side. In addition to that, we'd also like to give the city the cul-de-sac in exchange for these two paper streets that we've been using for about over 50 years. That's the upshot of it.
Thank you so much. Do any committee members have any questions? Seeing none, do I have any other council members with any questions? Seeing none, could I get a motion?
I'll make a motion for a favorable recommendation out of the committee.
Sounds like Mike moved. Is that correct?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes. And can I get a second? That's Alfredo. All in favor?
Jenny, just to note that I'm recusing myself from this one as well.
Okay. So that, I believe that's unanimous. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Next up, we have ordinance 165221, an ordinance authorizing the sale to Dr. Brenda Robinson of the city-owned property located at 23 Lark Street. I think this is kind of connected to our last ordinance. Is there any additional discussion that anyone feels is needed? I don't know if that was Kelly motioning.
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to add the correction in there. I was trying to come up with her address. It's actually 266 Livingston Avenue. It's on the same side as 21 and 23. It's a couple of lots away, 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe five lots away from where. So she is not immediately adjacent, but that's certainly her neighborhood and an area that she takes care of. I just wanted to get that on the record.
Thank you very much. Is there anything additional? Seeing nothing else, could I get a motion? And I believe Councilmember Robinson is recusing himself from this vote as well. So could I get a motion from either Alfredo or Mike? I'll let you guys decide.
I'll make the motion to move it forward with the positive recommendation.
I'll second
And
that.
second, thank you. All in favor? Excellent, thank you so much. And last up, before we have our update, ordinance 196121, an ordinance authorizing and directing the grant to 1053 Brewing LLC of an easement in the city of Albany over a portion of the city right-of-way of Bridge Street for the construction and maintenance of an ADA compliant ramp and deck at Druthers Brewing Company. Kelly, I believe this is yours, correct? If you'd like to speak on it.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Again, I also support this this change. It's similar to what we did with Albany Distillery with the easement to allow them to build their ramp. This is for Druthers. It's a deck, and they're going to do some improvements to the sidewalk and do some things to make it ADA compliant. I support it. I don't know if there's a representative from Druthers here, but no. So, but again, I support this. It's an easement, and I think it'll make things better down there. And
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions or comments? Seeing none, would anyone like to make a motion?
Yes, thank you. I move that we pass ordinance 1961.21R out of committee with a favorable recommendation.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
That's unanimous. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming through. And next, if our treasurer is still there, and I believe Nick and Anne Marie are there as well, if they don't mind stepping in for the update, that would be fantastic. And if it's possible, for the people at home, I don't know if it's possible to have something that's a little bit better to hear from when they're speaking, but it's hard to hear.
All right, we're going to try this if that's okay. How does that work? Good enough. So I'm Darius Shonfar, Albany City Treasurer. I have the final 2020 financial report to provide. I think we'll provide that first before going into the federal funds. Is that what we prefer to do here? Okay. Well, 2020 turned out to be not a great year for us financially, but not a terrible year for us either. And it didn't quite, it was not as bad as we had feared it was going to be. In the report, as you can see, we were down about 4.4 million. We ran about a 4.4 million loss last year, with our revenues coming in 4.4 million less than our expenses.
Darius, sorry.
Can you hear me?
We need a handout. We're going to hand out our slides up, so we can just reference.
We can put the report was provided to everyone a week or two ago. So I don't know if we have it to put up, or if people can reference it on their own iPads or the like.
Jay, are you pulling it up? Okay. Thank
Let's
you.
give people a moment to open it up and. All set? Okay, great. Well, as I said, we finished the year about a $4.4 million loss. Our revenue totals for 2020 were about $174.4 million, and our expenses were at $178.8. As I said, this caused a loss in the fund balance of about $4.4 million, leaving us with an unrestricted fund balance at the end of 2020 at about $10 million. As we've discussed several times, the optimum fund balance that the state controller's office would like us to have, and that good fiscal practice would indicate we should have, is about $18 million, or about $8 million short on it right now. That being said, the next page of the report really goes into the revenue side of things. The biggest issues were sales tax, which came in about $2.4 million less than expected, less than budgeted. Again, this was not as bad a hit, I think, as we had feared back around this time last year. The real hit came in the second quarter, and the third and fourth quarters were relatively normal for us, indicating solid economic activity. I think we had expected and hoped that it would be better based on first quarter numbers of 2020, but obviously the pandemic hit, and that caused a significant hit to economic activity that's taxed by sales. Our pilots were down a bit because mostly the budgeted revenue for voluntary pilots did not come in as was hoped. And we did take a hit on some fines from last year, a little bit on parking, but other fines as well. Traffic court fines decreased with the courts being closed for a long time, and that was the biggest component of that. The other big component where we took a hit in revenue was on state aid, much of it coming from the lack of, or I should say, the reduced revenue coming from the capital city funding, as well as reduced AIM monies. I'm happy to report that the loss in the AIM money for last year, which was booked in 2020, has been made up by the state thus far. And we're still waiting to see if the state will reimburse us for the other $1.2 million in capital city funding that they have not provided yet. Landfill revenue decreased from last year, due in part, I think, to decreased economic activity, but also, I think, from a conscious effort by the landfill to boost its prices for taking in waste, and in an effort to extend the life of the landfill as long as possible. So there's a fair hit there. Everything else in the report is fairly self-explanatory, I think. So if anybody has any questions you want to get to right now, I'm happy to do it. Or, yeah, Mike?
Yeah, the property tax revenues increased by 1%. That's
Yeah, the property tax revenues increased. The property tax revenues increased by about $58,000 compared to budget. It was about $300,000 compared to last year. That $58,000 figure to budget is really based on having lower amounts of SEOs, of challenges to people's property taxes. So it was not that high last year. As far as property tax revenue that we took in, it was slightly there was slightly more delinquency last year in terms of total tax dollars, about the same number in terms of total parcels that were delinquent. What we have seen this year, continuing from last year into this year, is that we are not taking a huge hit on property tax right now. Right now, we're about $1.4 million less in delinquent property taxes than we were at this stage last year. So, which all bodes pretty well for the situation that our tax-paying citizens are facing. I think the fact that so many people had reduced expenses over the last year because of COVID, that money went into the property tax bills.
And state aid was down by only 9%. I thought it was going to be down more than that.
Compared to last year, that's basically the cost of the capital city funding reduction and the AIM reduction.
So,
And those are monies that are going to be reimbursed, or at least we know the AIM money is reimbursed for this year. The capital city funding should be reimbursed this year too, we hope.
so we are better off with regard to state aid than we thought we were going to be?
We are better off. The state came through more than we had, more than the worst case scenario that we had envisioned. So the hit to capital city funding was only $1.2 million. We were concerned there was going to be 2.4 or even more. And the hit on AIM we were concerned about as well. But they both came in about 10% less rather than the 20 or more percent less than we had been led to believe, I think, by the state at this time last year. But you don't really know that until the money actually comes in. So a little better than expected. And again, the bright side is I believe that those monies, again, AIM is reimbursed for this year already. It's last year's AIM money, but it's been reimbursed to us in this year's, I wouldn't say this year's budget, but this year's cash flow. And we're waiting to see if the state is going to reimburse us for the additional $1.2 million that they withheld from us last year for capital city funding. We expect that should be able to be in this year's budget, and the state has, I know that the Assembly and the Senate have actually passed legislation to require the state to do that. I think it's sitting on the governor's desk right now. Anything?
I'm sorry. So the 16,772,000 that we were off from what we had budgeted to the actuals, that includes the 1.2 million that we didn't get for the capital aid, as well as the
Correct.
that we might be getting back. So the
Yes.
which includes I just want to make sure I get the numbers right. The 1.2 plus the 630. Are those the numbers we're
Yeah.
looking at?
Yes.
So we may get an additional 1.8 million.
No, 1.2 million we might
Sorry?
get.
1.3.
1.2.
1.2
Yeah, that's what was withheld.
may come back.
Yes, this year. And that would count to this year's.
So the 16 million is what we were off. We were able to gap it, so we were able to save roughly
We saved on expenses, so that $16.7 million gap that we see in revenue was made up for by
saving.
12-ish,
Yeah, so we saved roughly
The
7
numbers get a
million.
little muddled here because one of the things that really saved the budget financially last year was using the reserve funds for debt service, an additional $5.3 million. Actually, we used all the $5.3 million, but $3.5 million was not originally budgeted for in the budget last year, but when the council acted to permit us to use that money, we used that to pay off the debt service, meaning that on the expense side, it didn't have to come out of general revenues.
Okay, but I just want to make sure. But the total, from what we brought in to what we spent, we were off by
4.4.
well plus the 5.3, so
Right.
9.7.
Right. Correct.
Okay, so we were off from what we spent to what we brought in 9.7.
Correct.
Which is significantly better than what we had
Yes.
conversations about.
We were
this time
concerned
last
about
year.
a $15 million hit overall.
Thank you.
Yep.
Just have a question about the pilots. I know that COVID, especially with nonprofits last year, the nonprofits were hit pretty bad. do they have any course of action about what they would do going forward with the voluntary pilot payments? Or
The city, the city, because they're voluntary pilots, the city does what it can to convince them that out of the goodness of their hearts, they should contribute more to the city, essentially. There isn't really a legal redress for it. If they choose not to pay it, they don't have to. And you know, I think they've put pressure on them to try and do it. But again, you know, when you're looking for money from nonprofits that were hit by the economic downturn, it's been a little difficult. But we can at least give AMC a little bit of credit right now for finally settling their contract with their nurses. Now maybe we can move towards a voluntary pilot.
great, thank you.
And I'd like to note that Councilmember Conti has a question as well. The committee members are done asking questions.
Go
ahead, Richard.
Thanks. You know, it's sometimes hard to hear. Darius, curiosity question maybe. I'm looking at the overtime section.
Okay, you're moving ahead on me.
Oh, were you going to touch on overtime?
Yeah, I'm going to get to overtime in a moment.
Okay.
Okay? All right. Because now I'm going to disbursements, not just the revenue side, but the expenditure side. And what we saw was a slightly higher compared to last year and compared to budget on personal benefits, which is essentially salaries, fringe benefits, which is essentially medical care, health insurance, retirement. Where we did see the savings was on non-personnel service. Again, the use of the debt reserve helped us to cut the deficit down from, as we were just discussing, from 9.7 to 4.4 if we hadn't used any of the debt reserve. But the one place where, as I think Councilman Conti mentioned, first let me say that the personnel service side, the benefits expense increased largely because of retiree health insurance. We had increased costs there, and retirement expenses increased as well. So that led to that being slightly over in budget. But on the non-personnel service side, which is, you know, everything from energy usage, our lights, decrease in utilities was 1.6 million. Our debt service was actually decreased by using the debt reserve. It doesn't show up in that figure, but that's where you see some of the savings. And a lot of it is also community development funds, which are federal funds that did not come in and therefore were not expended. It's really kind of budget neutral. But the big, as always, overtime was the big. It continues to be over budget, and the chart is right there for everyone to see. Really, fire department was the ones that were, you know, significantly over their overtime. Police came in slightly under budget, and most departments were actually under budget for overtime. Some were over, but really, fire department was where there was approximately $1.5 million of overtime. So, Councilman, you had a question.
Yeah, I was looking at the overtime budget, in particular police and fire, and I was curious. Ordinarily, you don't see, especially in the year that we had in 2020, that while the police overtime was a little bit ahead of 2019 for 2020, its 2020 total was actually less than the budgeted amount. And
yeah,
considering the number of vacancies and possible demands for service, I just trying to understand that.
I think, as has been reported to me, and I think maybe Nick can talk a little bit more about this, largely the police presence was not as needed without events that were going on and with us being shut down. That being said, the fire department services were needed to a greater extent, and they contributed a lot on the vaccination, health, testing sites, and all that kind of stuff.
Okay. But
So,
some of those events, to the extent they weren't city-sponsored, would have been reimbursable over time. That would not have been included. I'm not sure what the breakout would have been on that.
Right.
In terms of the fire, which is a huge jump, well, it is a jump from 2019, but also huge percentage over budget. Were there some COLA contractual increases in there during that period?
Nick,
Were
were there any
there-
COLA contractual increases, COLA increases that caused the fire department overtime?
Yes, the fire department did get an increase last year. The increase in their overtime, part of it can be contributed to that, and also there was it was the timing of a class and the timing of hiring it. They had more vacancies.
Yeah, so
than
my
usual.
question though, then Nick, is, and I don't recall, did we increase in the last budget the overtime allocation for the fire department to reflect an increase in compensation based on contracts? And do we do that as a routine basis, since that does drive the overtime amount?
We did not do that last year, but that's something that we should absolutely look into going into this year. I think more so than the COLA, the biggest driver in that was the delay just for the new class. And that really put it over more so than the COLA adjustment would have done alone.
And then, Dan, I don't know if if first quarter report for this year was out yet, and then is the overtime in the police still where it is? or
Yeah,
is it-
I did provide that already to the council. It was standard, essentially, still
Alright.
over, but nothing out of the ordinary for what we've seen over the last several years, which is over budget.
Okay. Did we get the first quarter report? I don't remember.
Yes, I believe we
did.
sent it out in May, if I'm
Okay.
not mistaken. Yeah.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Okay. So really, that's the long and the short of it. I don't know if there's any other questions that anyone has for me. Again, we came through not unscathed, but we've depleted our debt reserve funds. That went to closing essentially the budget gap for last year. We're $4.4 million less in fund balance than we had the year before. We are carrying about a $10 million fund balance. We are surviving, but if it were not for the federal funds that are coming in, we would be more on the knife's edge this year than we had been in probably 4 or 5 years. So, thank you. So I think next, Ginny, we'll hear from Nick and Anne Marie and somewhat myself on the American Rescue Plan Act funds. I think that's where people have questions. And maybe JR, I don't know if the PowerPoint, okay. So we have a PowerPoint that we're going to get up. I guess I would start off by saying the long and the short of it here with the American Rescue Plan Act funds is it's still a work in progress. The regulations, the draft regulations came out in May, and we have been kind of going through it and trying to pick out what we can and can't do with it. We've received some conflicting interpretations from entities that are providing us numerous webinars for us to look at to learn more about it. More to the point, the accounting regulations really only came out within the last week, so we're trying to parse through those as well. And the final regulations from Treasury aren't going to be coming out for another couple of weeks. So it's still a work in progress, but I think it's important for us to start talking about it right now as to what we know, what we don't know, what we know we don't know, and what questions that we're working on that we're looking for. So I'll go over to you guys.
So I think it's been a little while since we met and gave an update on where things stood with the stimulus. There's been a lot that's going on, as Darius mentioned, and there's been a lot that's still to come. I actually should start off by introducing myself for anybody that's not aware. My name is Nick Blaze. I'm the acting budget director for the city. I'm joined by Anne Marie Salmon here, our Deputy Commissioner of Administrative Services. To kick things off with this kind of timeline, back in April, there was the kickoff meeting for the external COVID task force. As you, I'm sure, are aware, the mayor established an internal task force and the external one. The internal one consists of a lot of people and folks here at the administration, as well as both Darius and Dorsey, our chief city auditor. It wasn't until May that the U.S. Treasury issued an interim final rule with the official allocated amounts. The city of Albany was slated to receive $80.7 million. That's scheduled to be delivered in 2 tranches. The first one was received by us on May 24th. That was $40.3 million. In June, we posted an RFP for consulting services related to the American Rescue Plan Act funds. Proposals for that are due July 21st. What we're hoping to get out of that is consulting on eligible uses, some accounting and reporting help as well. A number of cities have done so as well. Rochester, New York's looking for the same thing, and we just think that that would be a shrewd thing to do, considering the enormity of the responsibility of these funds, and it is, to our knowledge, eligible to be paid for with stimulus funding as well. June 24th, the U.S. Treasury issued a 35-page report on compliance and reporting guidance. We've been sifting through that. There's a lot of webinars on that from U.S. Treasury, and that's kind of the official document that people have been referencing in terms of what may or may not be eligible. On June 30th, which was just last week, the Office of the State Comptroller released accounting guidelines and requirements for ARPA funds. We really weren't sure if we would need to do some mid-year budget adjustment, such as an appropriation increase. We did reach out to some of our government consulting boards like NICOM, things like that, and they were helpful. They're keeping us in the loop on interpreting a lot of these things, and that really wasn't settled until that official guidance came out as recently as last week. What's ongoing is informational sessions and webinars on all of this. The U.S. Conference of Mayors has been tremendously helpful. NICOM's been helpful. Bloomberg Philanthropies interprets this guidance with some experts who are familiar with this, and they're great about, they have a portal online where local governments can post questions on things if you're not sure if this would be an eligible expense or how this should be reported. So we've bounced a couple of questions off them, and they're a good partner in this as well, in addition to the National League of Cities. But it is still a work in progress, and it's good to have so many sets of eyes on the guidance. Just to walk you through some of the major categories of the eligible uses of funds. First and foremost is support for the public health response to COVID-19, mitigation efforts for that. The second one, which is a big one, is to replace public sector revenue loss, which, as you know, we took some major hits to sales tax due to the inactivity and stay at home for most people. Water and sewer infrastructure investments, as well as broadband infrastructure investments. The last 2 categories, we have premium pay for essential workers. This is really intended for the people who are on the front line with the greatest health risks being faced due to the natures of their jobs. And the last one is just using the money to address negative economic impacts with a special focus on communities that may have been hurt the greatest. Supporting the public health response includes a couple of subcategories. Any efforts that a city may undertake to mitigate and contain COVID, medical expenses, behavioral health care, and public health and safety staff. This is perhaps more so for county governments or anybody else that may have been directly setting up vaccination facilities, but it includes anybody that's a recipient of these funds as well. Addressing the negative economic impacts, this includes workers and families, assistance with food, housing, utilities, things like that, survivor benefits for family members of COVID-19 victims, small businesses. This is one that, as we gather more information, do our community needs assessment, and have a chance to review that report of what our needs are as a community from the external task forces survey that they put out, we may look to some type of investment in this area. Things that may be included are micro grants, loans to mitigate financial hardship, aid to implement COVID-19 prevention and mitigation tactics. As I mentioned before, there is special focus on the hardest hit industries, especially tourism, travel, hospitality, things like that. And you're also eligible to use this money to rehire public sector staff. The other major category was provide equity-focused services, and a lot of this is based on what's been determined as qualified census tracts or low-income areas as defined by housing and urban development. Replacing the public sector revenue loss. So this is formula-driven. We're going to take our actual revenue and compare that to a counterfactual revenue growth factor based on our last full year's actual revenue. The base year for us was 2019. This is actually one of those situations where having our fiscal year on a calendar year makes things tremendously, it's just more helpful and it's a lot easier. But so 2019, our base year, with a 4.1% allowable growth factor. It's either 4.1% or the average of your last 3 years growth factor, whichever's higher. You're allowed to apply where your revenue should have been to determine what your gap in revenue loss is as a result of COVID-19. And what's important to note about this too is it's not our deficit that we finished the year with. This is actually kind of nice because, as Alfredo, Councilmember Ballerin pointed out, we did have more of a $9 million hit because we were $5 million. But consideration, so this is straight revenue loss based on a growth factor from our previous base year before COVID. Premium pay for essential employees. I mentioned a little bit about this before. This is for the people that were really on the front line. They were not just determined essential, because we had a lot of people that were essential, but they were also able to work remotely. This is really geared towards compensating. It's an additive thing in addition to whatever pay folks may have already received. But it's really focused at compensating those folks who are on the front line. They still had to deal with members of the public, perhaps, or pass items back and forth and handle those things with their coworkers. Water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. This is really aimed at building or facility upgrades, drinking water, eligible uses aligned to Environmental Protection Agency projects. There's a broadband component as well. This isn't so much free internet, but expanding access to areas that don't currently have access. A couple of important ineligible uses to point out. This money cannot be used or result in the net reduction in tax revenue. We can't lower taxes and plug our budget with stimulus. It cannot be deposited into pension funds. It cannot be used for routine payroll contributions to pensions. And it cannot be used to fund debt service, legal settlements, judgments of any kind, and it cannot be deposited into rainy day funds or financial reserves. Our timeline ahead, July 16th, the Treasury Department public comment period ends. Local governments, as well as organizations like NICOM and USCOM, are given a chance to digest the initial rules and provide feedback to Treasury if they think anything should be changed. Perhaps it's unfair to local governments, or that it just could be improved, and maybe because something we don't think may have the intended effect. So they're receptive to that. They're taking feedback, and that's when the comment period for that ends. Our first report to U.S. Treasury will be due August 31st. It's going to cover the period from the award date through the end of July, and will also include our revenue replacement figures. Our first quarterly report would be due October 31st. And the timeline for these funds, and I'll backtrack just a second, it's a multi-year thing. It goes, well, this will be our revenue loss estimations, but the funds must be obligated by the end of December 24, and they must be expended by 26. So if we've committed to pay for certain things by the end of 24, money doesn't have to be out the door, but we have until 2026 to spend this, but they must at least be obligated before that time. Just to go back on the RFP that we've put out, it's for financial advisory services, project management, cost tracking, accounting and reporting, auditing, and communications related to the stimulus. I'm going to pass it off to Anne Marie, who is going to run us through an update on the COVID Recovery Task Force.
Yeah, I'm going to jump back to the RFP for a second. Just so you know, we're trying to build our internal capacity to manage these funds because we have a two-person budget team right now. Actually, it was one, and 2 weeks ago we got another member. So we're looking to shore that up because if the funds are not spent appropriately or tracked accordingly or reported on accordingly, we are on the hook as a city to pay them back. So we're seeing what's out there in terms of assistance that we can contract out for. And the RFP is open right now. So the task force, I'm actually not a member of it, so if there's questions I don't know how to answer, I'll probably pass it over to Darius. But just briefly, I think the mayor had shared with the full council the overall goals of the external recovery task force, but I think their major role is to help us figure out how to spend that bucket of money that's associated with the negative economic impacts and supporting our local establishments, businesses, the community, and the equity-focused services. So they are pretty much right now going through a needs assessment. I think they put out a survey, and they've been, I don't know if the responses are back, but they've been working on that the last couple of weeks.
A lot of the responses are back, and they're working on digesting, and I think the report will be coming out, I think, in 2 to 3 weeks or so. I think the role is really to identify where the needs are. It's not to actually pick and choose which projects get what. It's to say we need, we do really need broadband. Maybe our water and sewer infrastructure is okay enough that we can deal with that, except in this place over here. But they're helping us kind of organize the thoughts and the directions that the monies should go. And I can't stress enough. I guess there's a couple of things that I would add. Obviously, yes, the money is in hand, but the way I think everyone should really think about this is there's two pots of money basically. One is for revenue growth, and that goes for revenue losses that Nick was pointing to earlier on the chart. And we're going to see. I think we're still trying to figure out what is included and what's excluded from revenue growth and revenue losses. But we think we're in the neighborhood of $12 to $16 million in revenue that the city could be directly reimbursed from for 2020 revenue losses. That number rises over the next few years. It also is dependent on what our revenue intake is over the next few years. If things go well, then we can use less of this money to replace revenue that's lost, i.e. we got back $1.2 million from capital city funding this year. We got back the AIM money that we lost last year. It's now in our fund for this year. That would count as revenue for 2021. It was already counted as a revenue loss in 2020, but it counts as revenue for 2021 to mitigate that loss for 2021. I think the other pot of money, aside from revenue growth, is really for the other remedial measures directly. That goes more towards broadband, water, sewer, things that I think we as a community, as a council, as an administration, decide the money should be used on directly under the aegis of the Treasury regulations, which are not as clear, I think, as we'd like to have them at this point. But like I said, I feel pretty confident that if we decided, not that we're going to do this, but if we really decided to spend $40 million on broadband infrastructure in the city of Albany, that would be permitted under the regulations. That's pretty explicit. Other ideas are going to be coming forth and are being fleshed out, both with the task force and outside it. It's a mistake, I think, and this is important. It's a mistake for anyone to look at this as a slush fund, as a windfall, as a, now we can get our pet projects done. We see nothing in this that says, okay, City of Albany, you can use $5 million of this to tear down Central Refrigeration Warehouse. It's not for pet projects. It has to be within the aegis of the Treasury regulations. That being said, the monies that come in to replace revenue loss, that's what we're really kind of focusing on right now. To what extent the permitted use is for general government services. What that means and how we're able to implement that, we don't know yet. We don't know if we are going to be able to use this to replenish the debt reserve from last year that we used because of COVID and the diminishment in revenue overall. Are we going to be able to replenish our debt reserve fund? We don't know. Strictly speaking, no, under the regulations, but we're not sure if that's going to be reality. And again, what Anne Marie said, I fully expect that we will be utilizing other nonprofits in the area to help get money out the door to those nonprofits to meet nonprofit needs in the community. But we are the ones responsible for that money. So we set up an infrastructure, and that goes to what the RFP is for, to make sure that we have the proper infrastructure in place to monitor those funds that are going out. So, for example, if you think that we give money to the community loan fund to help support small business development in the city to make up for the losses during COVID, that's great. But the community loan fund is going to give out the money according to the rules and regulations. But we ultimately would be responsible if the community loan fund gave it to a use that shouldn't have been. And you can think that for the United Way would be the same thing. I don't mean to give too much credit to one nonprofit over others for their missions. And that's what we're weeding through right now. So I think if anyone has any questions now, unless there's anything else, this might be the time.
Hello. Okay. A couple more slides. I think you've seen these before. The money may have been updated, but just a reminder that the ARPA stimulus funds are just one part of a portfolio of available funding, and I think part of the external committee and the internal working group is going to be figuring out what is the best vehicle for paying for our needs, whether it's PPP loans or directing people to CARES Act or the grants through the city funding, but we're going to be working all that out. And here's a slide again showing some of the other regional and local players and what they've received federally. So just also a reminder that Albany County, CDTA, and the school district have received stimulus funding as well, and they are also on the external committee so that as a region we can best use our funds. And these are just the 5 working groups that the external committee is focused on right now, and I think each of these working groups is going to be sending down recommendations and a needs assessment. And here's the timeline for the Recovery Task Force. They are supposed to be delivering the needs assessment towards late July, and then we'll be taking those needs and drafting some recommendations and looking at how much we split the money internally, externally, and going back and forth, I think, with all the stakeholders involved to figure out a workable plan. So immediate next steps is internally we're working on developing the accounting procedures for tracking eligible expenses, how you're going to see that in the budget, how do we figure this out just for reporting purposes. As I mentioned, we'll be hearing back from the external task force. We're hoping to engage a consultant to assist with the management of this giant project, and then at least figure out the next couple of years of funding so we can start moving that forward and getting money out the door as soon as possible. And now that's our presentation if there's questions.
think I saw it in guidance someplace else in terms of this presentation. Do, let's say, the small community-based not-for-profits, 501c3s, fall into any of these categories?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think the challenge that we are facing and figuring out how to deal with is how to get money out the door to those 501c3s, to the small nonprofits, and how to do that equitably to make sure that's going, appropriately under the Treasury guidelines. And yeah, that's completely what we envision.
Okay, and my focus, my concern is are small community-based not-for-profits that have not otherwise qualified for some of these bigger programs that might be in the arts or whatever, but they are overshadowed by these bigger arts organizations that tend to sop up all the money. So that's the type of, and ones that maybe don't have the same infrastructure to really apply for grants that these big other organizations. So that's a focus that I've been concerned about, that we not lose them, and they're ones also that likely had a revenue hit because the types of activities that would raise revenues are ones that they just couldn't do, whether it's, performances or other things that would happen.
I would say they should get their ideas and plans together now, and they need to be related to COVID, and they need to be related to COVID and the hit that they took last year. But they should be getting their plans and their thoughts together now in order to prepare to make an application for funding.
I'm not even sure that they're clued into what's going on. And I assume that there would be a competitive process also, that they would be able to apply
Yes.
for funds.
I think one thing that will be of particular importance is just communication to a lot of these local not-for-profits and for-profit businesses who may be eligible for more than one source of funding, because there's so many, as Emery pointed out, sources. It was a variety of federal funding options that we want to be shrewd with the disbursements and make sure that we're really given to people who may not be eligible for certain funding that's available elsewhere, for sure.
Can you guys, okay, couple quick questions. I want to focus on the 80.7 million. Of the 80.7 million, how much of that, I know what we've met in the past, we looked at 58 million going towards revenue loss. Has that number changed, or is that still the number that's going towards revenue loss?
It's a fluid figure. It's an estimate at this point, and that's an estimate over the next 3 years. It could change. If revenue in the city takes a spike, then that number will be reduced. But it could be that much. But we're having trouble at this point actually pinpointing what the figure will be for 2020 first, and we have to get that figure, I think, to the feds by the end of August. So, but I think we'll know more as the guidance becomes a little bit clearer over the next couple of weeks, and we get some of our more specific answers, to our questions. I've specifically asked of some of the webinars, for instance, can we use this money to replenish our debt reserve fund? And I've been told yes. And then the guidance says no. And then another webinar, another group will say, it's not so clear. So until we get those questions sorted out, we can't say. What I can say, however, is that the trajectory, you're essentially allowed to add 4.1% to your expected revenue per year based on 2019 numbers. If you're adding 4.1% per year, that is a greater figure than what the growth of our revenue has been over the last few years. So that should be a positive for, I think, Albany and for our revenue. The funds that will be used the funds that will replenish the revenue loss. That's not to say the funds for revenue loss wouldn't also be used just because it's in the revenue loss category in the city coffers. Doesn't mean it wouldn't be used for broadband again. It's just that we're trying to figure out what that money is and where and how every day we get a little closer, and hopefully by the end of this month, we'll have more solid answers.
Yeah, yes, because I think there's a couple more questions that have come up since what you're sharing. Now that we can't, what was shared was that we may not be able to use that to replenish our fund balance, as well as we may not be able to use that to go back and retract the increase that we made in taxes last year because of the unknown if we were going to get any federal support.
I would say what is clear is that we can't directly use it. So I can't take and say, we use this for this much. What's not clear is if once it gets into the city coffers via revenue replenishment, that it can't be used for that. And those are the answers that we're trying to get right now.
Just to add on that, yeah, Darius is exactly right. And when we file, this report and say this is our revenue loss number, it doesn't get swept back into our general fund or our fund balance. There are still several restrictions associated with that. You can fund general government operations with it, and then they define that in some detail in their guidance. But like Darius had mentioned, if, for example, we were to fund certain operations and we have to report on what those operations are that we're funding with the revenue replacement money, and that frees up money elsewhere, well, even though we don't earmark it necessarily to our fund balance, it could, in theory, that offset could increase our fund balance by the end of the year because we just happen to spend less than we normally would out of pocket for those same operations.
And we know that the reporting requirements are going to be very strict on all of this.
And in my follow-up, my last one, I'll let other committee members go. When we're talking about bringing in a consultant, I always have concerns with bringing in people to tell you how to spend money. I think we know how to spend money pretty well. Are these consultants also going to be in charge of trying to find ways for us to tap into the other funding sources, specifically the, Save a Stage, the restaurant resources, the ones that were all put in the slide that show that there's $15 billion out there to save stages. There's $25 billion to save restaurants. $50 billion to help get funding to relieve rent. So are these consultants also going to be tapped into to look into how we can get the maximum of those other resources that are aside from the $80 million?
That's the hope, that we find someone qualified who does have knowledge of various funding streams, federal, state, local, not only funds earmarked for recovery relief, but if there's other programs out there. And they won't be deciding where the money goes. We hope that they would steer us in the direction of information so we can make those choices as a city and with all the people involved who should be helping make those decisions. But absolutely, we do want help looking at that portfolio because there's only so many hours in the day, and we have to build a budget, and we have to just do the day-to-day management of city finances, and we felt that we needed some outside expertise to support us with tracking that information down.
Yeah, that's my full expectation, actually, and one of the reasons why is that we don't want to have money going to, yes, there's restaurant money available. For a variety of reasons, restaurant A, B, C, or D may have fallen through the cracks and may be eligible for some of this money somehow. But we want to make sure that they have exhausted every form of grant possibility that they have with the programs that are already out there. And that goes for landlords, that goes for tenants, that goes for all the groups.
Thank you.
Actually, just a question. I don't know if this is, more of a question for the mayor's office or you. Has it been factored in how these funds could potentially help with the potential closing of the landfill? There's been any discussion around that?
I don't know if there's been strict discussions on it, but I think it's something. The landfill is a constant presence in our lives. in our public lives, it's a constant presence. So I think it's certainly something that I think is going to be taken into consideration in all this. I don't know what, if any, direct use of this money can be used for the landfill. We just don't know yet. But there's no question that one of the big revenue losses from last year was from the landfill, because of reduced economic activity, and also because I think we need to do what we can to extend the life of the landfill to the point where we can actually come up with a viable solution going forward. So yeah, it's going to be part of the discussions.
Okay, thank you.
No, you can ask it. I can't hear.
I had one. Regarding the premium pay, to try to give some additional pay to our essential workers, is there an additional type of resources that we can go out to try to be able to do that for our staff members? Or would that,
Sorry.
I
or
don't
would that
believe
have to
so.
come out of the 80.7?
Yeah, I don't believe there's another avenue of replenishment for premium pay unless there's something that you know about. Yeah, I think this is really geared towards premium pay, really for last year, and some this year, but mostly for last year. And there's very stringent requirements on that. One of the things that I think will be, once we get everything, like I said, the regulations are pretty stringent, but once we've identified those who are eligible for hazard pay under the Treasury guidelines, it's a fairly simple calculation to provide those funds. How we do it is a different question, and it's something we've been talking about internally to get to a point where we can actually provide a path really for us as a city going forward. But we're still in the midst of really hashing through all those issues.
Thank you.
It appears that there are no further questions. And if that is the case, I'd like to thank everyone for coming. For those that have stuck with us on Facebook, don't worry. We will be uploading the recording, so you will actually be able to hear everything, and we'll also be sharing out that PowerPoint presentation. I want to give a huge thanks to everybody that was there. Thank you for the thorough presentation. And if I can get a motion to adjourn. Mike moves.
Motion for
I'm
adjournment.
going to say no seconds because it looks like he wants to. All in favor? Yes. I hope everyone has a great night. Thank you so much.
Aye.